Real estate wealth doesn't just happen. It's designed. Discover how developers craft value from the ground up. Welcome to episode 7 of Financial Freedom and the fifth episode in our Finding a Hotspot series, where we teach you the skills and knowledge you need to find the next real estate hotspot, the next BGC, the next Boracay, and the next big thing. Our mission is to empower Filipinos to build wealth and a brighter future. We are driven by a deep love for the Philippines and a vision of seeing the country and its people flourish. My name is Kane, and joining me today are my amazing co-hosts, Georgina and Justin. Say hello, you guys.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Okay, and together we've spent years diving deep into the world of real estate, finance, and banking. Our goal? To equip you with the insights, strategies, and inspiration that you need to make smart and informed decisions on your investment journey. Now, before we dig deep into our today's topic, let's just do a quick recap on what we talked about last episode. Justin?
Sure. A quick recap on this entire series because we've talked about so much, right? So, what we've talked about is what is a hotspot, the core concepts of these hotspots, traffic infrastructure, health and education infrastructure, planned job growth, and affordability. And last episode we discussed urban renewal. So if that all seems like it doesn't make sense to you, we highly recommend you starting off with the first episode because we made this series to be watched in order. So please go back and watch the first episode before you watch this one.
So today we're going to be talking about private money, also known as property developers here in the Philippines. So it's just one core driver today, but it's pretty influential. So let's talk about it. Let's start off with a definition of what exactly we mean when we say property developers, right? So private developers such as Ayala and MegaWorld, independently or in collaboration with other companies, including government entities, undertake large-scale developments that transform locations into thriving commercial, residential, or mixed-use areas. So let's start off with a question, guys. Why do you think property developers increase real estate value in the Philippines?
I'll go first. I got this. So I think this is pretty obvious, right? The urban planning.
Yeah.
Because of the urban planning, because of the comprehensive urban planning. So technically literally from dirt to a city. So whenever an area is transformed, whenever it's transformed from being underutilized or inaccessible into a well-planned urban hub, it increases the real estate value. So it increases demand for the properties in the area. People and businesses are attracted to go there, to the newly developed area. There would be more functional spaces, which means that it would boost the real estate values. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And just from a simplistic point of view on that one, it's like basically like land used to be dirt and then they built something on it. And usually when you build something functional on land, that land increases in value.
Yep.
Obviously, they do a lot more complex than just building something. Like they do entire residential, commercial, things like that. But from a simplistic point of view, they transform dirt into something more usable, and that will generally increase property values, right?
So let's just clarify for our listeners here as well. If you're not Filipino, property developers here do branch out into more than just a residential project.
Yes, that's true.
So this is something that I had to learn when I came from Australia, where a property developer would just build a house. That's not necessarily here, and that's not necessarily the case here in the Philippines. Property developers do often build entire condominiums alongside malls, alongside office buildings. They really do everything. They're a jack of all trades. So just to clarify that, so when we say we're really doing urban planning, they're really turning dirt into cities. Like, that's not an exaggeration. That is their bread and butter. That's what they're designed to do. So
Well, I was going to say the other important one that's like on topic of what we were just talking about is that they develop a whole lot more, right? And usually what can happen is they develop economic growth hubs, meaning they like BGC, Cebu IT Park, Clark Pampanga, they're all going to be they all have turned into business districts that have attracted multinational companies that rent out a whole lot of office space and also create a lot of jobs. And that increase in people from those jobs increases housing demand, right? So that is also another big reason why developers can increase the value of properties.
Yeah, like a property developer can single-handedly transform the landscape of one particular area because they do the economic side and they do the residential side. And a lot of the times, these property developers will also develop nearby amenities and, you know, lifestyle features, and they'll really put an effort into build a community. So they'll put a condo building alongside a mall, and then they'll build that around like a plaza or, you know, some kind of recreational space. And it really does build like a very tight-knit community that's pretty self-sustainable. You never really need to go anywhere else in order to get what you need because everything is right on your doorstep. So this includes malls, parks. It can also include schools and hospitals if they're building in collaboration with the government. Lots of things there that really improve the quality of life for these residents. And of course, residents want to live in these areas because they're so close to facilities that they use every single day.
Yeah.
They can also,
you go.
I was gonna say that they can also build around, you know, strong lifestyle feature locations like Boracay and El Nido, where it's already the lifestyle feature of the beach and the ocean's already there, and they're just building around that and improving and building the infrastructure and the residential spaces there so people can enjoy those lifestyle features.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I just wanna add to that as well, is that developers also improve infrastructure. Either it's by them or it's with them partnering with the government. So this goes with transportation systems, enhancing roads, utilities, that makes an area more connected and livable. So yeah, of course, if there's improved accessibility, this attracts more residents and businesses, which increases demand for real estate, and which also means it's going to increase property values. A very common example here is San Miguel. San Miguel had a large play in building the skyway system. So
and the skyway system is a road.
And it's a road. It's a road, and it connects major hubs and major cities in Metro Manila. So, and that's also one of the drivers on why real estate values
Definitely
go up in the city. Yeah.
Definitely. It's interesting here in the Philippines because there's different sources of funds for different types of projects that you wouldn't really connect. San Miguel is a beer.
Yeah.
You don't expect to fund your roads.
Yeah, it is. Originally, it was a beer brand, but now it's totally diversified.
Yeah. Everybody is really, they've got their fingers in a lot of different pies, so to say.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Just on a side note, actually, and I'm sure our listeners would have noticed throughout our episodes, if they've watched our episodes, hopefully you have, that, you know, we repeat a lot of our core drivers in terms of explaining like why a core driver can increase real estate values. We include other core drivers in our reasonings, right? And that's because like all these core drivers are very, very interconnected. Like we said, infrastructure, very interconnected with job growth, with our lifestyle features, with, you know, what we're talking about right now, which is our property developers. And lifestyle features, very interconnected. So everything, usually these core drivers mesh very well together. And that's why we have to say, hey, like the reason why, you know, property developers increase real estate values is because some of these core drivers are included. So I hope our listeners kind of get that fact. And the reason why we're so repetitive is because we want them to understand that a lot of these are interconnected, and they should be interconnected. Like the more seamless that they're together, the more likely that location will do well. Because if it doesn't mesh, let's say property developers, right, and infrastructure don't mesh, and the property developers build residential spaces or commercial spaces, and then the road doesn't lead to that place. Well, there's an issue, right? And that's why it all, or let's say for example, the lifestyle feature doesn't fit let's say a commercial space. Let's say maybe building it on a beach, like a commercial space on a beach might not necessarily be the best fit because people won't work because they want to go to the beach. So it's very, when you're listening to us repeat these things, we're repeating them so you understand that these all mesh and they should mesh. And if they don't mesh, a bit of a red flag.
Yeah.
Sorry for the side tangent.
That's absolutely true. And if we don't repeat these core drivers that we talked about as well, you should start questioning us. That if we're if we really know about what we're talking about, because they should go together. It should be interconnected. But anyways, let's move on. And since I just mentioned an example of how a property developer comes into play when it comes to increasing real estate values. What do you guys think are good examples of property developers as a core driver here in the Philippines?
Just before we move on, Kane, I think that Justin made a really good point about us repeating ourselves, right? And one of the things that we love to say is always do your research, right?
Yes.
So when we say property developer, when we're referring to them here in the Philippines, you need to remember that not all property developers are made equal, right? Just like any company in the world, they all have a brand reputation, they have different levels of credibility. And even though a property developer might tend to build one thing, it's important to check the details of the project that they're building now to make sure that you have the correct expectations. So what I mean by that is, for example, Mega World is one of the larger property developers here in the Philippines, and they tend to build residential, commercial, and lifestyle amenities all in one area because that's what they like to do, because that works for them, right? But a smaller developer, for example, like Philinvest, like SMDC, may just build a residential tower and nothing else around it. So this is why you need to do your research into different developers. You need to check their reputation, check their track record, see which projects of theirs were successful, and maybe even why they were successful. Because some property developers are able to market their new projects as luxury and exclusive and sell them at premium prices, but they might not necessarily have the history to back up those claims. Or, you might look at them and be like, yes, I can rely on this company because they have a successful track record. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so basically the reputation of the developer can increase the value or inversely decrease the value of that project.
Very good point, Regina. I love that. Thank you so much for interjecting.
Thank you. We can move on now.
Okay, let's move on. And just to connect with what you were saying, you mentioned a lot of examples already, like with SMTC and Philinvest. Why don't you give us an example of how developers act as a core driver and how they here in the Philippines?
I think it depends on whether or not they're acting alone, because like I said, Mega World can act alone and can offer you the commercial, the lifestyle, and the residential, but a smaller one like SMDC might not be able to. So do you want to talk about whether acting alone or whether acting with the government? Or
I think doing both is good for our listeners, right? So let's start with locations where developers acted independently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good point. Let's start with that.
First one that comes to mind is Eastwood City. For listeners who don't know me, I was Australian and I moved from Melbourne here to the Philippines, and the first place that I moved to was Eastwood City. So Eastwood has a big spot in my heart. It's very special to me. Eastwood is based in Quezon City and it is a Mega World creation. So it has a residential tower. It has lots of residential towers actually. It's right next to a mall. It's really beautifully landscaped. So there's lots of cinemas, there's arcades, there's a live, work, play kind of environment. Everything I need was within walking distance. I'm not super familiar with the commercial side of things, but I know that there were BPO companies and there were obviously lots of restaurants and cafes nearby. I'm not able to be any more specific than that, but Eastwood is definitely like one of the best places I've lived, including my experiences in Australia. It was just very beautiful area. It was so walkable. It was so safe. It was so convenient. And I know that it was very convenient for people to be able to just walk to work there as well.
Right. Right. I see Eastwood City acting independently. I like that.
And I
that a
think
lot.
Eastwood is also a good example of another core driver that we'll be talking about later, how it used to be a little bit of not a desirable area. It used to be,
Oh, yes.
yeah, on one hand, it used to be an
We
industrial
will talk
area.
about that. Yep.
Yeah, and then
Spoiler alert.
it sort of evolved into something else that people didn't really want to live in, and then Megaworld came in and transformed it. So we'll talk more about it in an upcoming
Stay
episode.
tuned. Yeah. Stay
I think
tuned.
another good example is New Valley by Ayala.
Oh, yes. In
That's
Laguna.
in
Yeah.
Laguna, yeah, and they developed that into an eco city. They added, it was raw land. They made it sustainable. They added mixed use communities. If you go there, it's residential, but there's also commercial centers and recreational spaces. Actually, it's great. And another good example of where a developer has acted independently without the government.
I think Nuvali is a really interesting one because it's also it's a house and lot sort of area. It's not like the condominium that you might expect in the city. So Nuvali is an example of a developer building like a real community, not just like a residential area. Does that make sense? Like I'm trying to say, like it's more family oriented than city living oriented.
Right. It makes sense. Yep. All right. Okay. Anything else? Any more examples from you guys?
I have a thought, but I'm not sure that this is on their own, so I might be incorrect.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm thinking of Leo Beach in El Nido, right? So
Oh yeah, by Ayala.
it is by
Yeah.
Ayala, but they also have an airport there. So I'm thinking maybe the airport was government funded.
Oh, I see.
I'm
I
not
think
100%
Leo itself, that community is fully Ayala.
Yeah.
For those
I think
that
the
don't know,
entire area. Yeah.
there's El Nido itself, and then Ayala sort of developed their own area where they created like the restaurants and resorts and also residential housing. Also, you can enjoy El Nido from their perspective.
Yeah, and Ayala was very, I don't want to say that they were selfish and when they were building this, but Ayala has very much staked their claim on this side of the beach. Like they have a lot of their own hotels there. I think they have like 4 of their own hotels there. So like they really have a monopoly on El Nido.
Yep.
And like we said, it's called Leo Beach because it's the Leo Tourism Estate, which is owned by Ayala. So like they've got their branding everywhere. Do you know what I mean? So like they really went all in on El Nido, and honestly, the results are beautiful.
Right.
Absolutely.
And also, I want to piggyback on that because you mentioned an airport, right?
Yeah.
So the airport, the Leo Airport, more specifically
Yeah.
in El
El
Nido, is a private airport. It's not. It's not initiated by the government. So
Interesting. Yeah, I wondered if
Yeah.
that was the case because I think only 1 or 2 airlines fly. They're small planes.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a private airport. So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So since you mentioned as well that government can come into play here with private developers, what about examples on where developers collaborated with the government? I'll start. I'll
Okay.
start with the very easy and the very
Let's say the one we're all thinking
okay.
of.
It's BGC.
It's
Of course,
BD.
BGC. It's always BGC, but yeah, it's the most common one because this used to be a military base. This city is always mentioned every episode, so but then again, it's such a good example because this was transformed. It was a former military base, and there was a collaboration between Ayala Land again and the government, more specifically the Bases Conversion and Development Authority. So this partnership redeveloped the area, and it became a premier business area and a lifestyle district. And it now features commercial areas, residential buildings. It's just attracted so many local and foreign investors alike for decades already.
Yep, the government had a huge part to play in BGC.
Yeah.
Definitely, we would be remiss not to mention it, even though we mention it every episode.
Yeah,
Like you said.
I think it's good. Let's breeze through. Like another 2 examples would be the Clark Freeport Special
Yeah.
Economic Zone, and then
Yeah.
Cebu IT Park. Those 3 examples, basically, when private developers have partnered with the government to create a residential, commercial, like a very big economic hub for the
Yeah.
country.
Yeah, mixed use development.
Yeah, mixed
Yes.
use. All right. So now that we've discussed some examples, let's go ahead and talk about our next topic, which are the things that we should remember when we think about this core driver, more specifically private developers. So the thing to remember, number one, is that bigger developer projects is usually with collaboration with the government, as just we just mentioned, right? Anybody would want to explain this to our audience?
Yes, so generally when bigger projects are done by developers, they have to team up with the government because it's such a big initiative. Like BGC, Cebu IT Park, and Clark required so much work in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the urban planning, that it almost requires the government. And also, if you think about it, the government owns most of the prime land, so developers can't even do bigger projects because the government owns them, so it has to be a collaborative effect. And then another thing to think about is that I think private developers usually don't like building infrastructure because they don't
Yeah.
make money off infrastructure. What they want to do is create the residential commercial spaces, things that they can sell and profit off, and then they allow the government or other entities to create the infrastructure. So
Yeah, so
Mm.
they'll
That's
do
another-
like the water, the plumbing, the electricity, the internet, things that are
Absolutely.
beyond the developer's control. Yeah.
yeah, another reason why developers usually partner with government entities is just for regulatory support. I mean, they don't want to be fighting the government all the time on, building permits and things like that. It's just probably, I mean, BGC was planned by the government, so they
Yes.
didn't have to worry about, the government getting in their way of
Yes.
building something because it's breaking like tax laws, or there isn't
Yes.
a economic zone, a commercial zone there, or anything like that. It was already planned out, and Ayala just had to come in and build and do what they're good at, right?
Like they work together rather than like working against each other.
Right.
Yes.
And the
absolutely.
incentives, the developers take advantage of the incentives.
Like the
in
tax
those-
breaks.
Yeah, the tax breaks. Yep, that's
I mean,
true.
people like to say that the Philippines is corrupt, but if you're working together, like there's some real good benefits.
Yeah, if there's just if we just work together, right? Oh my gosh.
I think if you
Anyways.
think about it as well, like when they work with the government, it's the risk is split between them and the government. They don't have to, like in the examples
yeah.
where we said it's all on the developer, like Leo, like Eastwood, they're bearing 100% the risk. Where when they did BGC, when they do Clark, when they did Cebu, it was mixed risk. So it was mixed
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
the developers and the government, and that just diversifies and allows the developers to not have to invest all their money into a project, which can be very beneficial for them. So that's why
Yeah,
they do
they
that.
can-
And then, yeah, what were you going to say? Sorry.
Sorry, I was just gonna say that like they can protect their reputation a little bit by sharing the blame.
So I was about to say, I think another thing to remember as well is when they partner up together, there's a lot more, one, community acceptance, because like developers aren't just working by themselves, and the government will lobby for this project. So
Yeah.
there's a lot more public support, but then
Yep.
also that public support and understanding that there's a big collaboration also makes investors confident in that project, or more confident than say just a developer-led project.
Right. Yeah, and we can see this in the examples that we gave just earlier, right? BGC, and you mentioned Clark as well, and also the third one in
Cebu.
Cebu. Yep, in Cebu, IT Park. So very successful collaborations and very successful areas at the moment. So let's move on to the thing to remember, number 2, which is to always check the viability of a development. Always check. Oh my gosh, do the research, you
Do
guys.
your research.
Absolutely.
Okay, Georgina, I think you're the perfect person for this.
Yes,
and,
because it's my
we-
motto.
So why? Yeah, go ahead and explain this to our audience.
When you're considering developers as a core driver of real estate value, it's crucial to always check the viability of a development. We want to know
Yep.
if it's a feasible achievement, if it's realistic. The viability of a project determines not only its successful completion, but also its impact on property values, investor returns, and community growth. So, why does checking viability matter? I would say your first point is obviously risk mitigation, right? You want to prevent losses, prevent financial losses. This could happen from project delays, cost overruns, even cancellations, which is a really big deal. It's unlikely that it would be cancelled altogether, but it's a possibility, especially if you're buying
It
through a
happens.
developer that's small. Yeah, it happens. And you also want to make sure that like the project that you're buying into is likely to finish on time and also probably within budget as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
A lot
the
of
more
the time,
the more
sorry.
viable the project, the more likely it's going to finish, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think that like a lot of the time, a lot of these residential projects generally are expected to turn over within like 5 to 7 years. That's a really long time to wait, assuming everything goes well. It can be even longer if something goes wrong. So if you're wanting cash flow really quickly, for example, from this property investment, then you need to check if the property is viable.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I
Okay.
think now it's important to discuss what potential factors may contribute to a project not being built, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
The risk. Okay. Let's talk about the
And
risk.
The,
Okay.
the obvious one, financial constraints. So they might not have the budget to finish whatever project that they promised. So that is
Yeah.
definitely a thing you should consider, is if they're promising this big project, where are they getting the money from? Is it investors? Are they doing it by themselves? Is it the government's contributing? Because that is probably the biggest reason why a project won't be built.
And it also relates to the size of the developer here,
Yeah.
right? So if a small developer promises to do something like, take example, again, BGC, right? So think twice.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What else?
I also think, you mentioned the government. Obviously, if they're working separately, that might be a little slower to get the permits that they need.
Yeah, I mentioned this. Yeah.
Yeah, they might not be as, they'd be a bit more strict if you're not working together.
Yeah,
Mm.
for sure. And then also, I want to add to that. Whenever there's a market change as well, so whenever there's shifts in the economic conditions or the real estate market demand, it
And-
can make a project non-viable, right?
We just had a good example of that, COVID, right? That
Very
really
nice.
delayed
Yeah.
and stopped developers from doing anything. So absolutely,
Yeah.
market change can really stop a project from being built or delay it massively.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Also, like we mentioned in last episode with France and the river, environmental concerns can play a really big impact,
Yeah.
especially if a land is like, swampland or is not necessarily clean enough to build, which can be a problem here in the Philippines. Litter is a problem. So that's a very big concern that you might need to take into consideration.
Well, I think a good example would be when the community opposes that because of those environmental concerns, right? Like in Palawan, they really, I think they're very concerned about overdeveloping Palawan, and the locals want to preserve the beauty of nature there.
Yeah, and you can't
So
blame
that's
them.
something that can. Yeah, you can't blame them at all. Definitely not.
Yeah, because El Nido is, top 10 most beautiful beaches in the world. If not, I think it's like top 2, top 3 usually. It's like, it's very, very gorgeous. Everybody wants to protect nature's beauty. And yeah, people might not necessarily want you to build there.
Yeah.
People don't necessarily want tourists in their area.
Yeah.
All right. So since we're already mentioning some examples of projects that are examples of those factors that you guys just mentioned, why don't we give our audience examples of developer projects that actually never got built?
Yeah, they're rare, but they happen.
It happens. It actually happens. Why don't you start, Georgina?
Yeah. I think one that comes to mind isn't necessarily a residential project, but it was a big project and it was called the Philippine Diamond Tower. I think it was meant to be in Quezon City. And this was actually a partnership between the government and a private developer. So, this is a really great example of where we say the government isn't necessarily a surefire way to a safe investment, right? So this was a tower that was meant to be like a telecommunications tower or an observation tower. It was meant to be 612 meters tall. So it was going to be one of the largest or the tallest structures in the world. So that could have been really good for tourism. It could have been really good for the local area, for the local economy. And yet it fell through because it had funding issues. It had issues over air traffic security, which is something that you don't even think about. Obviously, it's so high in the sky, it could have hurt planes, things like that. And I think also the government changed, the administration changed. So it wasn't as important to the other president, but that's fine. That happens. But yeah, this is just one example that comes to my mind.
Right.
I don't know if Justin's got a better one.
It's such a good example because it directly tackles about three other factors that we just mentioned. Number one, the financial constraints, right? And then number two would be the government. There we go. Regulatory. And then at the same time, air traffic can be. Did we mention something about air traffic earlier? I kind of forgot.
But I think air traffic is a regulatory hurdle.
I see. Yeah. There we go. It's such a good example. Very good example, Georgina. How about you, Justin?
Eton City in Santa Rosa, Laguna. I think that's a good one. But it's not, it's not like it hasn't been built. It's just like a lot of it hasn't been built. So some of it has been built and then some of it hasn't. So
like it's just been delayed or?
Yeah, I don't know if they're continuing with a lot of it, but what happened is they developed part of Eton City and then several components were delayed or shelved, mainly due to market conditions and, of course, our number one reason, funding. I think they just didn't see the potential returns in that place. And I would love to, just on a side note, we should do like a quick case study on this. Like, was it because there wasn't multiple core drivers? That's the reason why it never picked up? I'm not sure. Yeah. So I think that would be interesting.
It might have been because of the global financial crisis in 2008.
Oh, that might be as well.
Yes, absolutely. Because it started in 2007 or was announced in 2007. Yes. And then the GFC happened. That could have played a role. Absolutely.
Yeah. And you know what? This just directly tackled again one of the factors that we just mentioned earlier. Whenever the market changes, whenever there's a shift in the demand or the economic condition, it can make the project non-viable. And I think this is exactly what happened in Eton City.
Yeah,
definitely.
I think
definitely.
Overall, the main point that we're trying to make, right, is that when you're investing in real estate, you're investing a whole lot of money. And if you're doing that, you need to do your due diligence. You need to check where you're putting your money in. Even though real estate is generally a good investment and there is a general upward trajectory in real estate values, that's not always the case. So you have to do your due diligence in where you're investing in.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so I guess that's it. Those are the examples that we have about developer projects that never got built. Let's move on to the next thing that we have to remember. Very similar to the one that we just mentioned, the demand and the target market. Okay, let me go ahead and introduce this one. So whenever you're evaluating a real estate development project, one of the most critical and important factors to consider is the market, the demand and the target market. So understanding whether there's sufficient demand in that chosen area and if the target audience aligns with the development offerings is absolutely important for the project success and the potential returns on the market. Why? Why does it matter? Number one, we've talked about this, to ensure the project's viability. Right? So if a project has high demand, it's more likely to achieve more sales.
Yep.
And also risk reduction comes to play here. So aligning with the market needs minimizes the risk of unsold units and financial losses. So yeah, that's one factor that's on the top of my mind. How about you guys?
I would say pricing. Obviously, if something is in demand, it's more likely that it would be more expensive. So if it's less in demand, it's going to be cheaper. So I would say, the supply versus demand argument really does influence the pricing strategy of these project developers, and also, can tell them whether it's going to be a profitable development.
Yeah, and from a target audience perspective, if you understand that, hey, they're targeting younger people that don't have a lot of money and they're pricing it at a very high price, well, that's probably going to not create a lot of demand. So that's why it's important to understand the target audience and the potential demand for the project, because then you can understand if the developer is doing the right thing in terms of pricing, at least.
Definitely.
So now that we've talked about why demand and target market matters, let's discuss about how to assess the demand in a particular project area. So let's go ahead and talk about the first one, which would be market research, and the perfect person for this would be Georgina, because she loves to do her research.
I do love to do my research, but I'm going to keep this one brief because we're actually going to do a little more in-depth about this in a later podcast for you guys. So we'll go really deep into how you can assess demand and your target audience later on. But just as an overview, like, you need to do your market research, you need to, do your analysis on supply and demand, trends, projections, things like that. Look at economic factors like job growth, employment opportunities, also average income levels. You also need to look at the location, think about its accessibility, its nearness to infrastructure, also whether proximity. Yes, thank you. Also whether it's considered a safe environment, and then also you need to do your competition analysis, which is a really big one. You need to look at what else already exists in the area, what is proposed to be built in the area. You need to do all of that to determine if there's going to be demand in that area. Also, for the target audience, again, just briefly, you'll need to do a demographic profile, which is looking at their age groups, their gender, their lifestyle preferences, things like that. Income brackets, or whether or not people can afford to live there, and also cultural and social factors like community needs. So like whether there's going to be schools, parks, shopping centers, things that match what the target audience is likely going to use or want or need.
Okay. Yeah. Now let's just summarize all of that, because
that's really, a lot.
It's a lot, and it's compact. So number one, you conduct your research, your market research. So before investing or before proceeding with a development, gather the necessary data on the market demand and the target demographics. That's number one. Number two, monitor the market trends. So stay updated on the market conditions and be prepared to adapt strategies accordingly. And then number three is align the development plans with the target market. So ensure that the project's design and amenities and the pricing matches the preference and the financial capabilities of the target market. Okay, I hope I did a good job summarizing that.
Yes. Right. And like we said, we'll talk more about it way more in depth in a later podcast.
Yeah, so stay tuned. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next thing that we have to remember: oversupply. Think about oversupply. This is a topic right now that's being spurred up in the real estate conversation here in the Philippines. Justin, I think you'd be really good for this. So go ahead and
oversupply basically means there's too many condos or residential or commercial, whatever it is, of that type of asset that you're trying to buy. There's too much of it compared to the demand. And real estate, if you think about it from a very high level overview, what increases or decreases real estate value is supply and demand. So if there's more demand than there is supply, real estate values will go up. And if it's inverse, real estate values will decrease, right? So the main impacts of oversupply is, number one, like we said, real estate values. Real estate values will generally decrease when there's an oversupply because there's just not enough. It's just not valuable enough because there's too much of it. Think about diamonds is another good example of, like, when there's too many diamonds, diamond prices will decrease. That's why, just on a side note, that's why there's only a few, like the diamond market is a monopoly. Usually there's only a few actual big diamond creators, and they try and control the supply because they understand if they flood the market with too many diamonds, it will decrease in value. Same with real estate.
Justin
So
hasn't
that-
kept
that
up to
is-
date with the latest on lab-grown diamonds, clearly.
Whatever, right? So, and we're talking about a specific area, right? So, for example, BGC, everyone's saying there's an oversupply of
Everyone
diamonds.
says it's oversupplied.
Yes,
Sure.
and that can obviously decrease pricing, or it can also slow down equity growth. So that's why oversupply matters. Also, from a rental perspective, if there are too many condominiums, let's keep it with BGC, one, it's harder to get rentals because like there's more competition. So you're going to have higher vacancy rates. And all that just creates a market saturation, which means the market is saturated with too many similar property types, and that decreases demand. So that's a brief explanation of oversupply and why it matters to investors.
Right. Okay.
What
Now,
do you think? Sorry, Kate. But what do you guys think is the best way to assess the risk of oversupply?
Okay.
Do your research.
do your research.
Yes.
I'll take this one because Shashina's been doing a lot of research in this podcast already. So I'll take this one. So number one, do market analysis here. So you have to know the number of existing properties in a specific area and those that are under construction. Know the inventory levels. By inventory, I don't mean like inventory like in a storage area, like inventory in real estate, okay? Like the supply of units in real estate. And then also when you're doing your market analysis, you should be able to know the absorption rate. So what do I mean by this? You have to analyze quickly how properties are being sold. That's the absorption rate. How quickly your properties are being leased in an area. That's the absorption rate. And then thirdly is that you have to look at the demand indicators. Okay, so you have to look at the population growth. You have to look at the employment. You have to look at the income levels. Those are how
Interesting
you
one, right?
Yeah.
Because like I don't think people think about that, but like because if there's a growing population and people have jobs and they have good income, then they're likely to take up all that excess supply. But then if the population is decreasing and there are no jobs, then no one's going to take up that supply. So it's a very interesting one to think about when it comes to oversupply.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of factors that come into play when it comes to demand. So also the kind of jobs comes into play here. So the kind of jobs. So maybe a lot of people are employed, but maybe those are minimum wagers, right? So it might not drive demand as high as we would expect it to be if, take for example, the jobs in that specific area would be like doctors. Maybe there's a lot of hospitals built there. So it depends. Again, that's another car driver. I invite everyone who's listening right now to listen to our previous podcast. But yes. Okay, I think that's it for me. What about you guys?
Yeah, no worries. I think also, like I mentioned before, you need to look at future development plans, see what else is being built in the area, see what else is upcoming or planned to be upcoming, and also look at zoning changes. Zoning is very much a governmental decision. It really has an impact on property prices because if you're next to an industrial zone, maybe that might be more expensive or more cheap depending on the type of industry that you're next to. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a lot worse being next to a factory than it is being next to an office. So that could really influence property demand.
Yeah.
I think another good one is just economic forecasting, checking how healthy economy grows, because that can be a good indication of whether people are going to be confident in investing in the Philippines. And then the other one in terms of economic forecasting is interest rates, because interest rates is generally one of the biggest drivers of people buying real estate. So if the government announces that there are going to be cuts to interest rates, you can expect people to start buying, and then if people are buying, less likely for oversupply, right?
And we've mentioned how the Philippines GDP is one of the fastest growing in Southeast Asia back in episode
Yes.
1, but that could very quickly change. So always keep up to date.
Yep. All right. So now that we've discussed about assessing the risk of oversupply, let's go ahead and talk about the strategies to mitigate oversupply. This recent oversupply. So let me go ahead and start this one. Of course, market timing. So we have to be aware of the market cycle here. So cyclical awareness, recognize the stages of the real estate market. So we discussed about this in our previous episode, but just to give a recap, there is the recovery, there's the expansion, and then there's the hyper supply or oversupply, and then there's going to be the recession, right? And then of course in market timing, you need to be strategic on when you're going to enter and exit the market. So enter the market during low supply periods, most specifically during the recovery or early expansion phase. So we discussed that in detail in our previous episode. So please guys watch it, please. I mean, sorry, not watch. Listen to it rather.
Yeah.
What about you guys? What do you think?
I think I have an interesting take on this one. So in the news right now, it is 22nd of November 2024, right? Just so everyone's clear. There's a lot of news about oversupply, especially in BGC
Yes.
and other residential places. And
Yes.
everyone's scared to buy right now because of that oversupply. Well, I think that investors have to realize that it's better to buy when people are scared than when there's a huge demand for it. Because if you think about it, it's like you said, Kane, I think a good time to buy is early in the recovery phase or kind of in
Early
the expansion
expansion.
phase. But you got to be careful in the expansion phase because there might be a lot of hype already around an area.
Yeah.
So I don't think I think it is a decent time to be looking at an area when there's oversupply. So to be like, okay, BGC, all bad news about BGC, because what can happen is prices will decrease because the demand decreases, right? And that might not necessarily be the time to buy, but there's a time to look into that area. So when you start hearing like, oh, this area is oversupply, I think as an investor, that should pique your interest, understanding that real estate is about cycles, meaning there will be a time where real estate values will be undervalued. Then there will be a time where values will be where they should be, and then right now BGC is overvalued, but then what happens when it's overvalued, it will then drop back down to being undervalued. That happens. So when people start talking negatively about a location like BGC, might be a good time to start thinking about whether you should be buying in that area. And I mean, BGC might be a bad example because it's a very mature market. So, and the whole point of why we're teaching this series is to buy before it becomes BGC, right? But if you are, for example, looking into an area like BGC, this is the time to start getting interested when everyone doesn't want to buy in BGC, because by the time everyone does want to buy in BGC again, well, the demand will be back where it should be. Prices will increase again, and then you've missed your window. So that's my interesting take. Is that
I think that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Because I was just thinking while you were talking that yes, of course, oversupply will not last forever. It is a cycle. It will eventually, sort itself back out again.
Yep.
And, maybe oversupply is a good time to buy if you can afford to hold the property, if you can afford to hold it while it's going through this period of turmoil, because you might not be able to rent it out. Like that's just a reality of it being oversupply. If you can get a cash flow positive property, or you can just leave it empty and still hold it, so that would mean that it's not necessarily your first investment property, it would be your third, your fourth, your fifth. Then it can be a good addition to your portfolio. I agree with Justin.
Yeah, I think my main point, just by the way, so everyone's clear, right? My main point is when you're buying property, you want to buy when it's undervalued, not when it is valued at what it should be, so, or overvalued. So in BGC's case, when it was undervalued is when it was before it was built, and that's why we're teaching this series, right? Is to find the next BGC and understand what signs there are and what core drivers will appear that will give you a hint of this location being a hotspot. But then it's like valued when things were already built and there was news on it and people started buying, and then now it's in hyper supply, so it's overvalued probably, and then because it's overvalued, eventually people are not going to buy in BGC and they're going to leave the area, and then it's going to go undervalued, and then that's another time to buy in, but then it's going to reset, because what's going to happen is because it goes undervalued, everybody's going to start investing in BGC again, and then the whole cycle restarts. But that's my rant for today. We're going to go on a whole episode on market cycles because it's so interesting.
Yep.
And it really helps you time when you should get into a location, even if it's mature like BGC.
All right. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to the next strategy on mitigating oversupply risk, which is value addition. Okay, so whenever there's unique offerings, of course, properties that are developed with unique features or amenities set them apart from competitors. So this is a strategy to mitigate an oversupply risk, right? So, and at the same time, high quality construction and design can make properties more attractive, even in saturated markets like in BGC. So I think that's one of the reasons it's still very attractive to some people.
I think a good example would be like when Georgina and I were trying to find a rental here when we first moved. The properties that really stood out to us were those properties that were designed very well compared to like a bare bones, like 1-bedroom apartment. So it does really help if you can, let's just example, if you're buying a condominium, to, even though all condominiums from a structural perspective is the same, you can make it look very good, and that can really help you in times of oversupply, because that's what people are going to be thinking about is like, okay, there are heaps of options and all of them look the same except for this one property that has, I don't know, great interior design, has a big TV, has a good view, etc. Right?
I think this is also like the Airbnb factor, right? Like if you in a period of oversupply and you're having trouble renting out your condo or your property, then you would pivot to like the renting on Airbnb, and in order for it to be attractive to people, you want to make it special. So giving your property a full makeover and making it like a Harry Potter theme, or making it like a zombie apocalypse theme, you know, whatever it is, something that makes it stand out from the rest will make it more desirable for people to rent while they're on holiday as well. So it's a good way to pivot in your investment strategy if you need to.
Okay. Yep, that's absolutely true. All right. Before we move on to our next topic, anything else from you guys? Did we miss out any other strategies here?
I don't think so.
Is that it?
Good. Yeah.
All right. So let's move on to the things to remember. Number 4, get in early. Get in early. So of course, this is high risk and high reward. So investing in early in real estate, in a real estate development project, can offer substantial rewards, but it comes with significant risk. So getting in early is the riskiest by offering the highest rewards. So what do you guys think? Why is getting in early? Why do you think it offers high rewards?
There's a thing here that happens in the Philippines when you're buying a pre-selling condominium, is that they'll give you a discount, right? I don't think that happens in Australia. But if you are friendly with your agent, or you know, if you just happen to be inquiring about a pre-selling condo at the right time, they'll be willing to give you a discount, and sometimes it's, you know, 2 or 3%. Like, it's quite significant, and that will really help you with your down payment. And obviously all our listeners might not be aware that the down payment can be paid over 5 years, you know, 3 to 5 years usually here in the Philippines. So they really help you get into buying your first property here, and not even your first property, but also sequential properties as well.
Just in terms of pricing, I mean, generally, if you're buying anything, like buying in early is cheaper than, let's say, compared to buying when it's already built. because
True.
then when it's built, the developers will add to that value because the building is already built versus you're just buying land basically. I see a good example where if you bought in BGC 2004 when it was dirt, it probably around, I don't know, I'm guessing a couple million, versus when it was already built in 2008 to 2012, it's an extra couple million.
Yeah.
So generally that's the reward of getting in early, is that you're buying because you're just buying the land basically, and then when something's built on it, you're buying the land and the building. So that's why it's cheaper to buy before it's built.
And also, you know the phrase, the early bird gets the worm. I'm thinking about how if you get in early, you have a better chance of buying one of the better properties, right? So like a condominium with a pool view, or the penthouse suite. There's only one penthouse, right? So there's limited choices of the best units available, and they're going to be snatched up first. So if you're an early buyer, you have the first pick of the most desirable units with the better views, the better location within the project development, within the building. So I think, if you get in early, you're more likely to make more money, right? Because that's how your rental yield works. Your rental yield is based off the purchase price, which is most likely going to be cheaper if you buy early.
That's right. Anything else, you guys?
Now, a lot of these are the same as we discussed earlier, so I won't go through it in too much detail. But number one would be project delays and cancellations. Number two, market uncertainty. Number three, developer unreliability. And number four, something we haven't discussed before, would be funding constraints. That means that, because you're parking your money in a investment, it may, and there's delays, for example, you won't be able to access that money unless you get lucky and sell it. So those are the risks. Now let's talk about potential strategies. Guys, what do you think are good strategies to reduce risk?
Well, number one, of course, we're going to just repeat this. Do your research.
Yeah, always do your research.
Conduct thorough due diligence. So have research on the developer, check their track record, their financial position, their financial health, their reputation in the market. And we mentioned this earlier already. Assess the viability of the project. Assess its feasibility, including the location advantages and the demand forecast. That's for me.
I would also say you need to stay informed. You need to be on top of the news. You need to be on top of the market conditions. There are always going to be indicators of a risk on the horizon. So you need to monitor interest rates. You need to monitor employment rates, any economic factor that could affect the market, and also your competitors as well. Any other developers, any other developments in the area that might impact your supply and demand?
Yeah, I think, and the last one people should probably do is to plan their finances, understand what they can risk, what they can't risk in terms of financing, and then plan for delays, because delays probably do happen, and plan for things to go wrong and add that into your budget. It's also good to diversify your risk and not put everything in one basket. So
Okay.
I would say that part of diversifying your risk is also choosing a property that has multiple core drivers.
Yes.
Which brings us to our last thing to remember. Thank you so much for that, Georgina. Our last thing to remember for today's episode will be multiple core drivers reduce the risk of buying in early or speculative pricing. So there's increased likelihood of success when there are multiple core drivers. We keep saying this over and over again. So when a location has 3 or 4 core drivers, such as, like, for example, robust infrastructure, attractive lifestyle features, planned job growth, it's significantly more likely to thrive.
Definitely. Yeah.
And those things, if those core drivers are in place, and you, like, if it's a new development, by the way, it's like you hear about those core drivers, right? Because they might need to be built first. So that's I think that's important to remember when we're like, oh, make sure there's multiple core drivers. Our listeners might be like, well, like BGC was once a patch of dirt. How am I supposed to know if there's multiple core drivers going to be there? Usually the government or these developers will tell you in the urban planning if there's going to be like infrastructure changes or lifestyle features, or are they planning to create commercial spaces, so there's planned job growth, all that stuff, right? So if you're thinking about it and you're buying like a pre-development, that's how you have to understand if there's going to be multiple core drivers. But the point that I was going to make is when there's multiple core drivers and number one, you're investing in early, well, it gives you a lot more confidence that that will be a success and less risky. But then also, Kane, you said speculative pricing.
Right.
Speculative pricing, just for listeners who don't understand what that means, it means when real estate values are priced based on non-fundamental things, and it's just hype, basically, right? When
Just
you
rumor.
understand, just rumor. When you understand that there are multiple core drivers, then you can, I guess, estimate that it's less speculative because that location is going to have, job growth, infrastructure, lifestyle, a lot of money planned into it. So it's a lot less speculation when there's a location with these multiple core drivers.
It's just safer.
Yes, absolutely.
It's safer. Let's just do a recap. Property developers in the Philippines drive real estate value by transforming unused land into thriving urban centers with integrated communities, boosting infrastructure, and attracting businesses that create jobs and economic growth. So while big projects often involve the government collaboration for resources and approvals as well, it's crucial to research a project's viability, target market, and potential oversupply before investing. So getting in early can offer high rewards, but this comes with risk, and investors should be wary of overhype and speculative pricing, as we just discussed just now. So locations with multiple core drivers like infrastructure, lifestyle, job opportunities, they offer safer investment potential. So examples of successful projects like this would include Eastwood City, New Valley, BGC, Clark. They all showcase how developers act as a catalyst for growth and real estate value.
Now, if you're ready to start your real estate journey in the Philippines, the best first step is understanding your budget and how much a local bank will lend you. Here's the truth though. Banks in the Philippines won't go deep into your finances up front. They'll only give you a rough range, leaving you guessing. And if you want to know your borrowing power from multiple banks, it's very time consuming because you have to go to multiple banks. That's where we come in with our free borrowing power consultation, and we'll do all the hard work for you. We'll look into your finances and give you a better estimation on what your borrowing power is, plus which banks will actually lend you that money. But not only that, we'll also connect you with very credible real estate agents who work with the biggest developers in the Philippines. So sign up because we're going to save you a lot of time, hassle, and it's probably the best way to start your real estate journey here in the Philippines.
And if you're not ready to invest quite yet, but you're interested in what we're talking about and you want to know more, be sure to join our real estate community group. There'll be a link down below for this and also for our free borrowing power consultation. In our real estate community group, you'll gain access to exclusive resources that can help you make better strategic decisions. Plus, of course, you'll be surrounded by like-minded people. You can talk to them, you can talk to us, you can ask questions and help each other. It's going to be awesome, and together we can build wealth and strive towards financial freedom.
So don't forget, number 1, to sign up for a free borrowing consultation. Number 2, join a real estate community group. Talk to us. Talk to me, to Justin, to Gina, and let's help each other. And then make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss anything to uncover the secrets to finding hotspots. So that is all that we have for you guys. Thank you so much for listening on our episode for today. And that is all. Thank you. And that is all. Thank
See you
you
next time.
See you
Bye.
next time, you guys. Bye.
Bye.